Georgia's Bobwhite Quail Initiative was initiated by the Georgia Board of Natural Resources, who not only conceived the idea, but promoted its passage and funding by the General Assembly. This video is dedicated to the members of the DNR Board in recognition of their leadership. Special thanks is expressed to the Georgia General Assembly for funding this important initiative. Gratitude is also expressed to the Okmulgee chapter of Quail Unlimited for their funding assistance of this video.
The bobwhite quail occupies an important place in Georgia's wildlife, culture, and heritage. In fact, in 1970, the Georgia State General Assembly designated the bobwhite as our state game bird. And at one time, many people recognized Georgia as the bobwhite capital of the world. In the 1700s and through the 1800s, Europeans settled Georgia, and much of the landscape was cleared and placed into crude patch farming. Where forest remained, timber cutting, woodland burning, and grazing of livestock were frequent. This kind of land use accidentally created habitat conditions that led to an explosive quail population. It created an abundance of habitat comprised of weeds, grasses, briars, and shrubs that wildlife biologists call early succession. This is the kind of habitat that quail must have to thrive. These weedy and buggy habitats provide quail with excellent nesting cover, brood range, escape cover, and food. Unfortunately, quail populations have declined drastically. Today, far fewer Georgians have the joy of hearing the call of the bobwhite in the spring or the experience of a covey rise.
The farm we're on this morning was acquired by my grandfather early in this century, and my father inherited it. Growing up, I really enjoyed hunting quail, and on the roughly 500 acres we have here along the Ogeechee River, in my teenage years, we'd find 6-8 coveys of quail pretty much any time we hunted. The last 10 to 15 years, we occasionally find a small covey.
The decline in quail populations has led to a decline in the number of quail hunters. In 1962, there were approximately 150,000 quail hunters in Georgia, and they harvested about 4 million quail that year. Today in Georgia, there are less than 50,000 quail hunters, who each year harvest less than 1 million quail, and a high percentage of these are pen-reared birds. The reason for the decline in quail and songbird populations lies primarily in the way that we manage land today as compared to decades ago. Many areas of Georgia have experienced increased urbanization and suburbanization, and that habitat loss has affected all wildlife species. Both forestry and agricultural practices have been intensified, and this has reduced the habitat value for quail. Many agricultural fields have been converted to exotic grass pastures where fescue, bahia, and Bermuda grass are grown, and these sod-forming grasses do not provide suitable habitat for quail. In the areas of Georgia where farming is still prevalent, which is primarily in the upper coastal plain, agricultural practices today are much cleaner than back in the early days. Today's farming practices result in larger fields, more intensive cropping of fields, and the destruction of hedgerows. Substantial agricultural land has also been converted to intensively managed pine plantations with closed tree canopies that shade out ground cover and food. Farming today requires the increased use of pesticides, both herbicides and insecticides, which reduces weeds and bugs. Another factor contributing to the decline in quail has been the reduction in the use of prescribed fire. Prescribed burning is an important tool for managing quail and many other wildlife species. Habitat fragmentation is another factor that is detrimentally affecting quail and other wildlife across Georgia's landscape. Where large contiguous blocks of early succession once occurred, there now exist only small islands or fragments of habitat. This can result in a variety of problems that leads to lower population densities, increased population fluctuations, and even local extinctions. In 1998, the state legislature came to WRD and asked what could be done to restore quail populations. A team of wildlife, forestry, and agricultural professionals from both the private and public sectors was assembled, and this led ultimately to the development of the Bobwhite Quail Initiative, or BQI. An important and unique aspect of BQI are the many and varied supporters of this program. Most state and federal natural resource agencies in Georgia have pledged their support, and some are assisting with promotion and implementation of BQI. Quail Unlimited is also a strong supporter. In fact, the Georgia chapter of QU is making significant financial contributions to BQI. BQI is purely a voluntary program with the primary objective of restoring habitat for quail, songbirds, and other early successional wildlife around the edges of working farms. It's a pilot program where specific practices are applied and monitored, and then the information obtained is used to fine-tune the program so that ultimately the best possible results are derived for the money expended. Additionally, the BQI provides many benefits to all Georgians. It's not only designed to increase quail and songbird populations, but many of the practices will improve water quality and reduce soil erosion.
The Soil and Water Conservation Commission was created in 1937 by act of the legislature. The Bobwhite Quail Initiative dovetails nicely with our ongoing soil and water conservation programs. One of the best management practices, which is the buffers along the field edges and along environmentally sensitive land, is a wonderful tool that we can use, and I think the Bobwhite Quail program, by promoting wildlife, while it's a wildlife benefit, it's also very much a good, sound conservation benefit, and it protects the quality of our soil and the quality of our water.
BQI is a proactive effort to address the decline in quail and songbird populations before they reach a critical level. More specifically, BQI is directed at establishing and improving nesting cover and brood habitat. These two important elements are often what's missing in today's intensively managed landscapes. There are three primary components to BQI. First, there is technical assistance. It's available to everyone. This is where a wildlife biologist provides written management recommendations and detailed guidance on managing land for quail. Second, there are financial incentives, a competitive process that makes funding available to those who meet certain eligibility requirements and apply certain practices. And the third component is the monitoring of quail, songbirds, and habitat on BQI farms. BQI practices include establishing and maintaining field borders, hedgerows, fallow patches, center pivot corners, and promoting conservation tillage around and across commercial row crop fields. The program also funds the burning of thin pine stands that adjoin row crop fields, which have been enrolled into the program. Another option is the enrollment of fields that have been entered into the longleaf pine conservation priority area option of the Conservation Reserve Program. All BQI practices must be applied during the first year of the contract period. Contracts are for 3 years and are renewed annually based on performance. BQI biologists flag the sites where practices are to be implemented. In the summer, compliance checks are conducted to make sure the habitat has been established and maintained as required in the BQI management plan. After the compliance check, the funds are allocated by the Soil and Water Conservation Commission. Implementing BQI practices on a farm does involve giving up a small percentage of the acreage on the edge of crop fields. On some fields, it may be costing more to plant these edges than can be made from cropping them. By putting these sites into habitat for quail, the land produces a crop of quail. This crop of quail may be worth more in the way of a hunting lease than can be made from growing a row crop. Another concern of some farmers is the potential risk of invading weeds and insects into the crop field.
I've noticed in our field borders since they've grown up now, and there's some weed species that have come up that I realized that I didn't think we even had. And one of them is a ragweed, which I understand is a very beneficial weed for quail from a standpoint of attracting insects early in the year, and also providing seed during the winter for quail. And I didn't realize we had as much ragweed as we have, but It's only growing in the 30-foot strip. It hasn't gotten into the field, and I don't anticipate it doing that.
A common question is, when can we expect to see results from BQI practices? It will likely take 3 to 5 years before we see measurable impacts. However, it was encouraging to note that we did see positive results even during the first year of program implementation.
The quail monitoring program obviously is in place to evaluate how well the program is doing in actually restoring quail populations to these farms where we're doing the management work. The monitoring has showed us that, in fact, there are bobwhite quail all over these farms in the upper coastal plain of Georgia. Very low densities of bobwhite quail, but they are very widespread, and almost every single farm that we monitored had coveys of quail. On those sites where we did no management work at all, we call them the control sites, 75% of those areas showed a decline in bobwhite quail populations. Conversely, those areas where we did management, we've shown a 71% stable or increasing population.
Let's review the BQI process. BQI is a voluntary program to restore habitat for quail and other early successional wildlife on private lands. Landowners, referred to as cooperators, may receive technical assistance and in some cases financial incentives to improve their land for quail. For cooperators who meet certain eligibility requirements, financial incentives may be provided for the establishment and management of field borders, hedgerows, field corners, fallow patches, conservation tillage, and the prescribed burning of pine stands that adjoin agricultural fields. BQI biologists work with cooperators to develop proposals for financial incentives. Proposals are scored and competitively ranked. A contract is developed for those proposals that score above a minimum level of habitat quality. Cooperators then implement habitat practices as specified in the BQI contract and management plan. Later, biologists conduct habitat compliance evaluations, and funds are allocated to those cooperators who have implemented practices according to the specifications. BQI contracts are for 3 years and are renewed annually based on performance. Payment rates are $40 per acre per year for dry land practices, $120 per acre per year for irrigated field borders and hedgerows, $5 per acre per year for the burning of pine stands adjacent to row crop fields, $1 per acre per year or $100 per field, whichever is greater, for conservation tillage. The maximum payment per cooperator for the 3-year contract period is $10,000. These are exciting times right now for bobwhite quail management and restoration. In fact, many states have their eyes on Georgia and our bobwhite quail initiative to see how the program develops. And in fact, several of our neighboring states are considering implementing programs similar to BQI. The more states, the more people implementing this type of habitat restoration, the greater the potential for restoring bobwhite populations across the Southeast. There's more hope for quail and quail habitat than there's been in a long time. And it is time. It's time to do something for the bobwhite quail.